Chapter 8. Sarah studied the waistcoat with intensity. It belonged to the senator. Or at least it had until she stole it from his steamer trunk. It was finely brocaded with mother of pearl buttons, the sort of garment worn only by a man of wealth. He might not even miss it, since he possessed several others. She studied the object with such concentration she did not hear her maid enter. "Miss Hill, please." Startled, she looked up. "Yes, what is it?" "A message, miss. I was told to hand it to you." She held out a small paper, folded and sealed with wax. Sarah recognized the seal at once. She snatched it and dismissed the maid. The note was, of course, from Mary Ellen, asking if she yet had what was required. For a moment, she thought of sending a return message, then forgot it. She would go at once, in person. The moon would be full tonight. The Journal of Sarah Althea Hill. Mary Ellen remains an enigma to me. I begin to think this city full of enigmas or enigmatic persons. Least of all, I understand not why she has offered to assist me. I tried to pay her, but she refused. She claims that the ethics of voodoo prohibit accepting payment for good works. I am told there are others who take donations, but she, of course, has no need, being already quite rich. Why then does she wish to aid me in securing the heart of the senator? I do not understand her explanations. She says the spirit Mama Legba has guided her to do this. I'm not sure if I believe her. She says that my courtship of the senator will have a certain effect on history, which she feels compelled to facilitate. I do not understand any of this. Nevertheless, she has given me instruction and awakened me to the power of voodoo. We are to perform a certain ritual, which Mary Ellen believes will secure the senator in marriage. I have already performed one minor act. Last week, when the senator was here, I slipped a few drops of my monthly blood into his coffee. This is to ensure that he will never be interested in other women. Next day I asked him directly, and he swore it true, that he loves no one but me. Still, he claims he cannot yet marry because of political reasons. When Mary Ellen and I complete this next ritual, his mind will change. Or so Mary Ellen assures me. Bannock lit up a cigar and prepared to sally forth from his office in search of hard news. Of course, there was more than enough about the war to fill the front page. With the coming of the telegraph, something had changed. San Francisco felt less an independent frontier city. It was connected directly to the world. Yet people still wanted local news, gossip about goings-on downtown, and the latest political scandals. Sometimes Bannock felt nostalgia for the old Committee of Vigilance. Now there was a fountainhead of local news and rumor. He was about to exit onto the street when he nearly collided with Emperor Norton. The Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico looked less than regal this morning. His coat was unbuttoned, his beard uncombed, and with a few drops of porridge stuck in it. His face was red and eyes bloodshot. Bannock's first thought was that the man had been drinking, but he could smell no alcohol. "May I have a word with you, sir, if you have a moment?" "Of course," Bannock said. Norton was obviously upset about something. "I was just going out. Why don't you walk with me?" They started down the sidewalk. Despite Norton's agitation, he seemed to have trouble finding words. At the corner, he said abruptly, "Wait, you must see this." He shoved a paper into Bannock's hand. Bannock unfolded it. A telegram from Missouri. "Randall, dead. Stop. I return to our city at once. Stop. Need your help. Stop. Marina." Bannock turned to stare at Norton. He could now see the man had been weeping. He tried to think of words of comfort. "Will suffering never end?" Joshua said. Sarah met Mary Ellen half a block down from the house on Octavia Street. Mary Ellen preferred that no one see Sarah entering her home, which suited Sarah well enough. However, they used Mary Ellen's buggy, driven by her own coachman. It was a fairly long drive to the cemetery on the hillside outside of town. By the time they reached it, night was falling. Mary Ellen dismissed the coachman after telling him to return in 2 hours. They walked through the iron gate and up the hill. Fog rolled in, and the air became chilly. Sarah pulled her fur wrap tight about her. Earlier, there had been some rain. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Mary Ellen put an arm about her shoulders to draw her close. "It's all the will of God, Miss Sarah. Have courage." "I thought you only believed in the voodoo spirits, not in God." "Now, whoever told you that? The spirits serve the will of God, just like everyone else." They trudged a narrow path up the hillside till they came to an empty place between 2 tombstones. Darkness descended quickly. Mary Ellen withdrew a thick candle from her bag, placed it atop a headstone, and struck a match. "I could use a dead man's hand instead of a candle, but that would be most powerful hoodoo. I don't think we need that. Now dig a little hole." She handed Sarah a garden spade. Sarah fell to her knees in the dirt and began scraping at the ground. Despite the dampness, the earth was hard. She had to stab at the earth with the spade, using it like a pick. It took a long time, but eventually she had scraped out a shallow depression. "Do you have a coat?" "Yes." Sarah took the waistcoat from under her own cloak. It was tightly rolled and tied with string. Mary Ellen went to her own knees and began to chant. Sarah didn't understand, but she recognized some of the words as French. Others she thought might be African. The chanting went on a long time. Sarah began to shiver. There was something about the chanting that made her afraid. She had never been sure of whether she believed in spirits or not, but now she was sure they hovered about her in the mist. For a moment, she thought she saw them dancing there by candlelight. Finally, Mary Ellen stopped abruptly. "Now bury it." Sarah dropped the coat into the hole and scraped dirt on top of it. It disappeared in a few moments. Mary Ellen arose. "Better tamp it down with your feet." Sarah did as she was told. Mary Ellen took up the candle. "That's it. Let's go." They began making their way down the path. Sarah glanced back once, but saw nothing for the darkness and mist. For a moment, she could not believe what she had just done. The buggy was waiting at the bottom of the hill. "Has it been 2 hours already?" Mary Ellen glanced at her pocket watch. "Nearly 3. We should go and have some brandy now." Next day, Sarah awoke feeling giddy. Mary Ellen had told her the ritual was almost certain to make Senator Sharon propose marriage. Of course, that would have to wait till he returned from his latest business trip. In the meantime, Sarah intended to amuse herself. When her maid brought the morning call, she glanced at the headlines. One item in particular caught her attention. "Prince Albert dies, victim of typhoid fever. Queen Victoria in seclusion." This transcontinental telegraph was surely a wonder. San Francisco had the news as quickly as the East Coast. The item gave her a wicked idea. She had not yet given up on Emperor Norton. If she could not wheedle his secret from him, perhaps she could shock it out. After breakfast, she strolled down to the Wells Fargo telegraph office. She filled out a message form addressed to Joshua Norton, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, Commercial Street, San Francisco. My dearest Emperor Norton, stop. Albert dead, stop. Must have new husband soonest, stop. Will you marry me, stop. Queen Victoria, stop. She chuckled as she handed the slip across the counter. A little joke between the Emperor and I. He's a good friend of mine, you see. The clerk scanned the message without smiling and then took her money. Sarah left the office feeling good. That should get a rise out of the madman. Next day, Mr. Buxby dropped by Joshua's room. Being occupied in court, it had been nearly a month since he'd seen Norton. It took a while for Joshua to fill him in on the latest news. He spoke of Marina in a distant, puzzled manner, as if he were trying to unravel some mystery. Then, seeming to remember the telegram from the Queen, he pulled it from a pocket and handed it across. Buxby read it over twice without smiling. Do you believe this is actually from Queen Victoria? Why not? It's as logical as anything else. Yes, I choose to believe. What will you do, Joshua? Do you intend to accept? Joshua frowned. Well, of course there will be the mandatory period of mourning. Normally a year, I take it. Naturally, we must obey the conventions. It's always possible something may change in that time, but I certainly intend to accept. This afternoon I shall send a return wire to Buckingham. Ha! Well, best of luck, Your Highness. He handed back the paper. And what of Marina? You say she is returning to San Francisco? Yes. Oh, I forgot to mention. I received another wire from her the other day. He looked around on his dressing table, but could not seem to find it. I'm afraid she has chosen a bad time of year to travel. It would be different had they not shut down the Butterfield stage because of the war. There is snow in the mountain passes. She wired me from Carson City, where she may be stranded until the spring thaw. Oh, I hope not. It's better now than it used to be. There are switchbacks over the passes, actual roads. If the weather holds off, she may be lucky enough to get a stage. I shall pray so. I wish I knew what she needs from me. The Journal of Sarah Althea Hill. It has been 2 weeks since the ritual. I do believe it is working. The senator was here for 3 days last week. I was able to steer the conversation in the direction of matrimony. Of course, this was after giving my 4-poster bed a thorough workout. He did not make an immediate commitment, but I feel he is coming around. He said something about waiting till the end of the war, but I think that was a thin excuse, growing thinner by the day. No one these days can open their mouth without mentioning the war. She had met the Emperor that morning over tea. She found herself baffled at his attitude. She'd expected him to mention the wire from the Queen, but he seemed to have forgotten it until she asked him. Where did you hear of that? He looked blank. I don't recall. I believe it was mentioned in one of the papers, or perhaps it was just gossip. Now he frowned. I hope no one has been blabbing. I had hoped to keep our betrothal a secret. Then it's true? You plan to wed the Queen? Yes, but not for a year at least. Of course, arrangements will have to be made. She gave a sweet smile. I suppose you shall have to disclose your net worth, your source of wealth, and so on. These royals insist on that. He shrugged. I suppose. Hadn't thought about it. Do you think the stages will get through from Nevada before the spring? They had better. Senator Sharon wouldn't like taking the long way around. She sipped her tea, beginning to feel put out again. Chapter 9. Marina felt a great weariness of the road. She felt weary of this stage shop where where she shared a tiny room with two other women. One was an older lady en route to live with her grandson in Sonoma, the other a teenaged bride trying to join her husband in Sacramento. Marina gathered the girl's husband had somehow found enough money to buy his way out of military conscription. Marina was weary of both of them. She'd lost track of how many days she'd been waiting at this stage shop. In theory, one could travel from St. Joseph to Placerville in 25 days or less, but that would be running day and night, stopping only for meals and to change horses. Not many people did that. Trying to sleep on a moving stagecoach was not a feat to be mastered with ease. She had left Missouri a month and a half ago. Now she wanted to move on. This morning, another stage had pulled in. Already there were 20 or 30 passengers waiting at the station, more in town at the hotels. However, Marina discovered this latest stage had only 2 passengers, both of them soldiers. She found them in the dining room, sitting off by themselves, intent on their bowls of soup and bread. She sat down near them. "Where are you men from?" she asked. She had long ago lost all shyness with strangers. Only after sitting did she realize that the older of the two, a sergeant, had a missing left arm. The other was a boy younger than Randall, with freckles and yellow hair. He looked up at her question. In his eyes she saw a sudden terror which quickly faded. He looked back down at his soup. "We're both from California, ma'am," the sergeant replied. "We were fighting in Tennessee till we both got mustered out. My name's Jedediah. You mustn't mind Edgar here. He don't talk much since he got wounded in the head." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Marina. Where are you bound for?" He gave a weak smile. "As for me, I'm going back to my hardware store in Stockton. Edgar's pa has a farm up Napa way. That's where he'll be going. I was thinking I should take him up there before I go home." Marina glanced at the boy, who didn't seem to be listening. "Yeah, that might be a good idea. As for myself..." Just then, the front door slammed open. A mule skinner appeared in the doorway. "Road's open, folks. The trail crew just now come in. Stages is going to start moving soon as they're hitched." On an impulse, Marina reached out and stroked the boy's hair. He went on eating his soup. "Do you mind if I share your stage? I get along with soldiers better than with old women and girls." Jedediah shrugged and got up from the table. They were on the move. As it turned out, the soldiers were riding a Wells Fargo Express stage. It was one of the first out the gate, while others were still loading and being hitched. There were also a couple of big freight wagons getting ready to move, drawn by multitudes of mules. There was a fourth passenger who climbed aboard the Wells Fargo at the last moment. He seemed to have no baggage other than a satchel. He was a young, handsome fellow with auburn hair and a thin mustache. He asked permission to sit next to Marina, the soldiers opposite. Then he grinned at the 3 of them. "Here's to a fine journey." He pulled a silver flask from under his jacket and offered it to Marina first. She shook her head. Jedediah said, "None for Edgar here. It don't do well by him, but I don't mind." He accepted the flask and took a long swig, then passed it back. "By your voice," Marina said, "I should think you're a Southern man." "Which I must confess to," the fellow said, "lately in Missouri, but I'm afraid I had no heart for the Southern cause. 2 weeks of the military was enough for me. I deserted and headed west, begging your pardon, ma'am." She smiled. This boy had a way of speaking that could make anyone chuckle. I've been in Missouri myself a while, but it's time for me to return to San Francisco. Would you be heading for the gold country then? He smiled back, eyes full of laughter. She envied him his laughter. No, ma'am, already tried that. I'm afraid mining is not my cup of tea. It's quite hard work, you see. Nowadays, I'm a reporter for the Territorial Enterprise. That ain't near as hard. I get to do a lot of work sitting down. Did you ever notice that folks who work sitting down get paid better than those who work standing up? She laughed in spite of herself. My name's Marina. He offered his hand to shake, as if she were a man. Clemens is the name. Samuel Longhorn Clemens. That's quite a mouthful. May I inquire why you're bound for California, Mr. Clemens? Reporter work, if you can call it work. I plan to make up some fanciful news stories and wire them back to the Enterprise. I was considering a travel story about the various saloons in San Francisco. That sounds like a job to be envied, Mr. Clemens. But do be careful, I pray. Careful's my middle name. Well, actually, it's Langhorn. May I inquire in turn what brings you to abandon the fine state of Missouri and return to the fleshpots and cesspools of San Francisco? Her smile vanished. She responded without thinking. My husband was killed in the war. There was no reason to remain. Only after hearing herself did she realize that she considered Randall her husband and always would. She turned to look out at the snow-covered mesas that would lead to the great pass in the Sierra. She said, I'm returning to the city to have our baby. In the stagecoach, conversation ceased for a time. Even young Mr. Clemens seemed at a loss for words. Climbing the long hills toward the pass grew tedious and boring, as well as cold. With all the new inventions of the time, no one had yet thought of a way to heat a stagecoach. The passengers closed the shutters to keep out the draft and huddled in blankets provided by Wells Fargo. Jedediah and Clemens shared more of the contents of his flask. The darkness and lack of view added to boredom. Now and then, Marina lifted a corner of the shutter to peer outside, only to see unending snow. She wondered what it would be like riding with the driver. At least there would be a better view. At length they came to a series of switchbacks to carry them up a steep grade. At each corner the stage would come to a near halt while the horses were turned. At least it was a change from the constant bumping. At one of these turns, Mr. Clemens glanced beneath the bench on which Marina was seated. I say, Miss Marina, do you play that instrument? Marina bent to pull out the violin case, Randall's fiddle. Not well, I'm afraid. I did take some lessons when I was at music school, and Randall, my husband, let me try it a few times, but I've not practiced. She opened the case and withdrew the fiddle, tucked it beneath her chin. She recalled Randall usually played with the instrument against his shoulder, but she had never tried that. She plucked at the strings, surprised to find them still in tune. With a feeling of curiosity more than any other emotion, she picked up the bow and drew it across the strings, producing a good middle C. Abruptly, she laughed, remembering something Randall had told her. Do you know the difference between a violinist and a fiddler? Clemens shook his head. A violinist holds the instrument under the chin, while a fiddler holds it against the shoulder. I suppose that makes me a violinist. She moved the bow again, beginning to play. She had given no thought to the tune, and only knew its name when she had begun. Beautiful Dreamer. She played slowly through two choruses and the reprise. When she put down her bow, both Clemens and Jedediah began to applaud. She smiled and turned to look at Edgar. He was staring back at her, with only a small fear in his eyes. After a moment, he looked down at the floor again, as if shy. Marina caressed the fiddle. She withdrew a silk kerchief from her sleeve to polish the wood. This was Randall's fiddle, Randall's voice, still able to make music. An idea began to form in her mind. She would go on the stage again, playing fiddle and singing. She wondered if it might be possible to do both at once. She had not heard of anyone who could do that. Perhaps if she held the instrument like a fiddler. She knew one thing for certain. Randall's voice was not yet silenced. "Play us another tune, ma'am?" Jedediah asked. "Happy to." She wasn't ready yet to play anything fast. She played Hard Times. Samuel L. Clemens closed his eyes and shoved his hands deep into his pockets. He might have been lost in thought.